So our next speaker is, and last speaker of the evening is Ingo Potrykus. Ingo earned his PhD in plant genetics at the Max Planck Institute for Plant Breeding Research in Cologne, Germany, and held many positions, most recently as professor in plant sciences at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. Okay, you ready? Okay, so I could tell you all of his honors, but I'd rather give you just a little sketch of my view of how he got here. I'm sure he will give you his view. So Ingo really wanted to figure out how to show that GMOs, or genetic modification, or modern genetic modification, which even back 20 years ago was strongly resisted, could be used to address humanitarian issues. And starting with a conference, or maybe starting with a conference organized by the Rockefeller Foundation 20 years ago or more, he devoted a good deal of his group's time to engineering, to creating a rice variety that could produce a precursor of vitamin A. Now, vitamin A turns out to be one of the most essential vitamins, small compounds that our body uses for a variety of purposes. One of the proteins in your eye has a vitamin A compound as part of it, and if you're vitamin A deficient, severely vitamin A deficient, you will go blind. This mostly happens with children who have rice diets, because rice in the grain does not contain vitamin A. But severe vitamin A deficiency leads to even worse problems with the immune system, and it's been estimated that it leads to the premature death of probably 2 to 3 million children a year. So by 2000, this project to produce rice containing beta-carotene, which is a precursor of vitamin A, it had then come to be called, is that feedback from this? Come to be called golden rice, because of its yellow color, was sufficiently advanced so that Ingo's picture appeared on the cover of the famous U.S. magazine, Time magazine. And the New York Times wrote an article about him. Now, I'm not sure he's going to tell you this, but I will. And I quote from the article. His ultimate goal was to redeem genetic engineering by proving that it could contribute to solving malnutrition, which he sees as the biggest problem in the world. This calling has its roots in his childhood, when he was an 11-year-old refugee from Eastern Germany after World War II. His father, a doctor, died in the last days of the war. He and his brothers had to beg, steal, and scrounge for food. And he's quoted as saying, "I've experienced myself what it means to be hungry." But already by 2000, plants modified by molecular techniques that Potrykus' group was using were under attack, and he was in the eye of a storm. The storm hasn't abated in the dozen years since, as you will hear. Golden rice is still not available to farmers. Indeed, the storm has, if anything, intensified. And just last summer, golden rice field trials in the Philippines were destroyed by vandals brought in by organized anti-GMO groups. Once again, the New York Times was writing about golden rice in the last few months. Amy Harmon has taken up the cause, explaining its purpose and its benefits. Quoting our last speaker, Michael Paruganan, who grew up in the Philippines, as I mentioned, there's so much information floating around about GMOs that is taken as fact by people. And it quotes you truly as saying, "It's long past time for scientists to stand up and shout, 'No more lies, no more fear-mongering.'" Now, with that mild little introduction, I'd like you to welcome Ingo Potrykus.
Thank you, Nina. And thanks the organizers of this meeting to get me here to Saudi Arabia. It's my first visit to Saudi Arabia. I'm glad to have this opportunity. I'm glad to meet people I know this long. I hope that I don't bore you with the story about golden rice, which will be the key of the presentation. On this picture, you are missing a nice picture which was underlying this, which has been lost on the transfer from the memory stick to the computer here. You will see the picture at the end of the talk again. The title is The Potential of GMOs for Public Good and the Tough Lessons from the Humanitarian Golden Rice Project. So we talk about GMOs. You probably have more or less an idea what GMOs are. You may have an idea what public good is as well. But I give you two citations to read that you all have the same background before we continue. And I would like to ask you to read this. You can read as well as I could do from here. I give you some time to complete reading. Okay, and what's public good? Why do I stress public good? Because all GMOs cultivated around the world since about 15 years on 150 million hectares have not been developed for public good, but for commercial enterprises to make a profit. Golden rice is the first case where the intention was from the beginning, and the entire project was under the umbrella of public sector scientists, was the idea to convince opponents to this technology that this technology can be used not only for the benefit of big companies, but it can be used for the benefit of the public at large. There's another reason why I'm stressing public good. All the products of this technology on the market have been developed under the umbrella of powerful companies. We have been trying to develop a product in a totally different situation. We were academics from university. We had no support from the machinery of big companies. We had to try to find our way in a different manner. The public good I'm talking today is public health. Public health is health of communities. We will speak specifically about malnutrition, and more specifically about deficiency in micronutrients. And micronutrients are, if you don't know, minerals, vitamins, and essential amino acids. We will speak very narrow about the lack of vitamins, and even more narrow about the lack of vitamin A. And this lack of vitamin A is one of the biggest and most severe public health problems in 124 countries. It affects 190 million children and 19 million pregnant women. It leads to a death of between 1 to 2.5 million through suppression of the immune system, and to about 500,000 blind children. About 600,000 women die annually from childbirth and vitamin A deficiency related causes, and so on. So we felt this public health problem should get some support from the upcoming technology of genetic engineering. The consequences of vitamin A deficiency are that it impairs vision up to complete blindness, and I've noted in the last sentence 500,000 blind children every year from vitamin A deficiency. It impairs epithelial integrity against infection, the immune response, hematopoiesis, skeletal growth, iron resorption, and of course, through iron resorption, all the problems with iron deficiency. The magnitude of this problem you may understand if you compare it to other better known public health problems like malaria or tuberculosis or HIV, AIDS. Vitamin A deficiency is a larger public health problem than these other better known maladies which receive far, far, far more financial support for a solution. Vitamin A deficiency is a part of the micronutrient deficiency which kills between 8 to 9 million people every year. There are, of course, traditional interventions which are somehow this limelight here is a bit disturbing. Can this be dimmed down, and can I get some light on the audience? It's no fun to talk to a dark room. I would like to see you. So if this is possible, to get some light on the audience and less light on me. So of these traditional interventions, there is distribution of vitamin A capsules, encouragement for diversified diet, encouragement for kitchen gardens, and support of plants rich in provitamin A. All these interventions are helpful, but they are not good enough because the figures I have given you for the effect of vitamin A deficiency we have on top of these traditional interventions. So it was obvious that we need complementing interventions to those which are in use already. The idea we picked up 1990 was to try to use the power of genetics to improve the micronutrient content of important crop plants, a concept termed now, not then, but now, biofortification. And the situation in rice is such that rice is a perfect source for calories, but extremely poor in micronutrients. So rice was a perfect example. And as rice is a basic food for nearly half of mankind, it was the most important crop to pick, and that's why we decided to try to do something about the lack of provitamin A in rice using genetic engineering technology. When we started this project in 1991, there were 4 alternatives to produce rice with provitamin A. The situation is such that the rice plant contains huge amounts of provitamin A in all green tissues. So the rice plant is actually loaded with provitamin A, but the rice plant has no or zero provitamin A in the part of the plant we are eating, in the endosperm, the starch-storing tissue in the seed. And biologically, this makes sense. Provitamin A in the seed would be of no benefit to the plant. So there were 4 alternatives we could follow. The easiest one would have been to find in the rice gene pool anywhere a rice plant with a yellow endosperm. That's what rice breeders have been doing for decades looking at more than 120,000 accessions of rice and rice relatives which could be used for crossing the trait into rice, and they had given up. They couldn't find anything. Actually, the idea of engineering provitamin A into rice was an idea of one of those rice breeders who had given up to try to find a yellow endosperm rice. When he was asked what this new technology could do for rice, he said, engineer a yellow endosperm rice. So it was an idea from a breeder who had given up. If you have this idea, the next step would be to try to use mutagenesis. And this has been done extensively with all technical possibilities, and the result was again totally negative, and to my surprise, no mutant has been found up to date. So if you consider what else you could do, then there is an obvious approach. If the rice plant has provitamin A in all green tissues, except for the endosperm, there must be a switch with which the rice plant turns off the pathway in the endosperm. So it should be possible to find this switch. It had not been hit by mutagenesis, but as more and more about the rice genome was becoming available, the chances to find this switch were quite positive. And at a brainstorming at the Rockefeller Foundation in response to my request for financial support, the experts felt it should be relatively fast to identify the switch and use the switch to turn on the pathway. This project has funding since 1992, and the switch has not been found, to everybody's surprise, including my own surprise. So we felt we tried the potential of genetic engineering, and we tried to engineer the pathway in such a way that it would produce provitamin A in the pathway, and this was considered totally unfeasible because it was really a very, very complicated approach. Because according to textbook knowledge, we would have been expected to engineer 8 genes, which all should collaborate to function. We had no knowledge about the biological background of those cells we wanted to engineer. We had no idea whether, even if there would be provitamin A synthesized, that this would be stored or what. So it was good reasons to be skeptical. Well, we were stubborn and started. We received some funding from the Rockefeller Foundation, a PhD in my laboratory and a PhD in the laboratory of my partner, Peter Bayer from the University of Freiburg. I will come back to Peter a little bit later. Our strategy was to introduce one gene after the other, to use direct gene transfer because we had developed direct gene transfer specifically for engineering rice because we believed, and at that time it wasn't possible, that agrobacterium would not function. We worked on the haploid level because you can produce haploid plants by answer culture, and then you could double up and have homozygous immediately. And then the idea was to establish pairs of genes by crossing, and then pair pairs to have 4 genes, and so on. So it was a long-term project, but it was a workable project, and we worked on this for 6 years, producing lots of single transgenic rice plants with different genes, and we started to cross. But all this took very, very long, and by that time, in 1997, we changed strategy because it was by that time possible to use agrobacterium. We had seen lots of unfavorable integration problems from direct gene transfer, so we decided we try agrobacterium for its simple integration. And by that time, we also knew that there is a gene from a soil bacterium which would make life far easier because it would fulfill the function of 4 plant genes. Here you see the situation with the first PhD thesis from Peter Burkhardt. Peter Burkhardt found out that you can forget about E1 and E2. They are active in endosperm. So the first important transformation step would be E3, the phytoin synthase. And this was the first publication. And then the important information turned up that there's a gene from a soil bacterium, Erwinia oridivora, which is a double desaturase gene which takes up the function of 4 plant genes. So here you see the important final experiment using E3, E5, and E8 and the selectable marker, using Arboretum, using co-transformation, hoping that it would work, and it worked. And you may know this gentleman on this picture. Salim Al-Babili was a very important partner in this project. You see the publication, and you see a star behind Xu Longye and behind Salim Al-Babili. And this star means these are ex aequo members of this publication, so they both contributed the most important part to this publication. So Salim was very important to help us to achieve what we finally could achieve, to have a rice which produces provitamin A in the endosperm in good enough quantities to make a difference if this rice would be eaten. The color is a reflection of the presence of provitamin A, and the intensity of the color is a measure of the amount of provitamin A. This rice is a reality since February 1999. If not a GMO, golden rice would be available as variety produced in the International Rice Research Institute since 2002 and would have saved millions of children from blindness and death. Because it is a GMO, it is not yet in the hands of the farmers. We are still fighting to get it through all the regulatory requirements. So the difference, GMO, non-GMO, makes a difference of more than 12 years in deployment. And as this is a product which can save eyesight and life, it is very unfortunate that we have to work according to GMO regulations. If the mutagenesis program would have produced a yellow rice, it would have been out since long. If the switch would have been successful, it would be out. Because we had to use engineering, we have to fight with very, very big problems. The humanitarian project is under the guidance of humanitarian board. It is a project of the public sector. All members of the board are members of the public sector. I'm the chairman of this board. So the project is organized and is being run by the public sector. And the concept is the following. We are collaborating with public rice research institutes around the world. They produce agronomically optimized and locally preferred varieties. In those countries where vitamin A deficiency is a public health problem, in no other country, we develop golden rice only for those countries where there is a problem. And once the varieties are released by national biosafety organizations, the seeds will be made available to farmers free of costs. Golden rice seed does not cost a cent more than any other rice seed in use in these countries. The farmers are the owners of these seeds. They use them in their traditional production systems. They do not need any additional agrochemicals, and they use part of the harvest for the next sowing. So there's no dependency whatsoever when starting to grow golden rice. The entire technology is in the seed. That's the beauty of a genetic intervention. All patents are covered by free licenses. The only condition for this humanitarian project, and there are conditions for a specific reason, export is not allowed. We want that the golden rice is consumed in those countries where it's produced. Local trade is permitted, but profit beyond $10,000 per farmer from golden rice is no longer considered humanitarian. This requires to pay a license, not to us, but to the company which has the rights for commercial exploitation. If you need more information, please ask me later in the discussion. We know now from nutrition studies that 40 grams of golden rice, that's the content of this petri dish, will be enough per day to prevent vitamin A deficiency. The publication you see at the bottom. And here you have a short list of what we have been spending our time since 2000 to produce a GMO product and get its regulation on the market. I'm not going through the list year by year or requirement by requirement. Let me just summarize. Fortunately, you can do things in parallel, so you don't have to spend 18 years, but we could manage all these requirements within a time period of 12 years. But what's so disappointing is that for none of these requirements is there any scientific justification. All these requirements are nothing else but opportunistic response to radical GMO opposition. And these are the requirements anybody coming with any transgenic project has to fulfill. Golden rice is just one example where it is so tragic that it takes so long. And it not only takes 12 years longer than a non-GMO project, it costs a lot of more financial resources. We had to spend up to $32 million on near completion of the project. I have here on 3 slides a list of the requirements. I think it's in your interest that I'm not describing all these requirements. Just to give you an indication of what is all requested. And the data to be submitted to national regulatory authorities have to be scientific publication quality type data. It's not sufficient to give some vague data. It has to be high quality scientific data which are to be collected and assembled in a regulatory dossier and handed over to authorities. A lot of requirements on molecular characterization, expression profiling, phenotype analysis, compositional analysis, environmental risk assessment, and so on and so on. Virtually none of these requirements are requested for any new product if it has not been in contact with genetic engineering technology. Here's a rundown of the real expenses we spent on the project over the last 12 years. You see that the science was financed by the public domain from the ETH, the Swiss Federation, the Rockefeller Foundation from EU. And the total scientific costs for this quite difficult scientific program run in 2 laboratories over 8 years was $2.4 million US dollars. All the remaining costs are costs which are related to regulation. So there are no further costs for any scientific progress. These are all costs which had to be collected and spent to fulfill regulatory requirements. If you compare the costs, basic science was in the range of 6.7% of the total costs. Product development without regulatory requirements would have been about 2.8%. The costs for regulation is 90%. So without GMO regulation, IRI would have had developed varieties from 1999 to 2002. Those would have been registered by 2003 and would be in use since then. We are still waiting for the time when golden rice will reach the farmer. And now, having shown you the consequences and costs of GMO regulation, let me give you some information about the justification for this regulation. There is none. There is scientific consensus and lots of publication from lots and lots of academies that there is no difference, principal difference between a normal crop plant developed from traditional breeding and the crop plant developed on the basis of genetic engineering. There is no scientific basis, which means we have this regulation not because there is any specific risk of which we have to protect the consumer or the environment, but we have this regulation just for fun because the opposition is so strong that no regulatory authority dares to change the situation. And by now we are in a situation where all the progress of this technology depends upon this regulation. It took 14 years to develop golden rice varieties which are effective and acceptable to the regulatory authorities and farmers. Now, as you are ready for transfer to the farmer, Greenpeace and associated NGOs are trying to block the transfer. Greenpeace is part of a worldwide operating consortium of NGOs who have a total of about $2 billion campaign money per year for campaigns against GMOs. This is a picture from the vandalism in the Philippines Nina referred to. These are definitely no farmers, and they have been identified. This was a group of 400 people who vandalized the agronomic test of one golden rice example. The Philippine Department of Agriculture identified the vandals. The Philippine Department of Agriculture will put these identified persons in front of the court and will hope that the Philippine judge has more sense for reality than you could expect from a European judge. Well, there was enormous reaction by the scientific community to this vandalism. Nina mentioned already one. I show you another one, an editorial in Science. And I show you the impressive array of signatories of this editorial. Bruce Alberts is President Emeritus of the US National Academy of Sciences and former Editor-in-Chief of Science. I want to mention one further person because it's here in the room, Nina Fedorov, as far as I realize, was the initiator of this editorial, and this editorial led to a fantastic petition which collected more than 6,500 signatures from scientists around the world from actually 92 countries. And here's another supporter of golden rice. Philippines is a Catholic country, and I tried to, to get the blessing for a golden rice project from Pope Franciscus I, and he did so after he understood what golden rice is and for what it is good for. It is pleasing to see that this picture, Pope Francis I blessing golden rice, has changed in the public attitude in the Philippines. We have the impression that the opposition in the Philippines has from now on a very difficult task to poison the Philippine population. This is a nice picture from Phil Rice, the National Philippine Rice Research Institute, which illustrates nicely the state of the art in the moment. Okay, that's it. Huh? We are here. These are the Philippine National Biosafety Authorities. They will decide, hopefully soon, what should be done with golden rice. One of those field trials which was vandalized was one of those depicted here. The Philippines did a number of agronomic field trials in different locations in the Philippines for agronomic performance. Once golden rice has passed the barrier here, it will be tested for 2 years in a large-scale nutrition experiment run by an NGO, Helen Keller, an NGO which is running lots of vitamin A supplementation programs around the world and who will carefully study how effective golden rice is in reducing vitamin A malnutrition. And when this will be positive, then golden rice will reach those who need it. This was one example. Science has made enormous progress also in the area of improving the content in testing micronutrients in crop plants, like protein modifications for an improvement in essential amino acids, carbohydrate engineering for more healthy carbohydrates, fatty acid modifications for more healthy fatty acids, vitamin A engineering, not only A but also E and B6 is possible now, antioxidant engineering, mineral content modifications like iron and zinc, reduction in plant allergens, and reduction in toxins. A recent publication you see here, a citation. Well, imagine micronutrient malnutrition kills every day 24,000 people, around 9 million every year. And these transgenic approaches could dramatically reduce this toll in death of innocent people. But each of these cases has to pass exactly the same path we have been running for 12 years now with golden rice. For each of those cases, you will have to collect at least $30 million. For each of these cases, you need to find personnel which is willing to work for 10 to 12 years on a project where there is no publication, and so on and so on. So you can guess how much of this will reach those for whom it has been done. So let me summarize our lessons from golden rice with regard to GMOs. The costs for GMO regulation are prohibitive for the public sector. Golden rice is an exception. It was a pioneer project. It received a lot of funding from different sources. This cannot easily be repeated. The social and economic costs are astronomical. In India alone, per year, 40,000 children dying from vitamin A deficiency, 20,000 becoming blind, with all the social consequences. GMO regulation has so far not prevented any harm. I don't know of any case where this regulation has really prevented a problem. GMO regulation is based on ideology, not on science. GMO regulation blocks one of the most efficient technologies with regard to food and nutrition security. I have shown you a few examples. GMO regulation prevents the public sector from developing GMOs for public good and disadvantages small and medium-sized enterprises. The technology will be used, as it has been used, for profitable private projects which promise a return to the company, at least for the investment, but not for public good projects where there is no financial return. GMO regulation supports a de facto monopoly in favor of multis and for exclusive industrial use of the technology. Anti-GMO NGOs enhances immoral situation. This technology has not been developed for exclusively industry use. I am one of the pioneers of this development. I definitely did not develop and spent 15 years of my career in developing this technology for industrial use. And the political sector promotes the status quo by generous financial support for anti-GMO NGOs. I indicated $2 billion campaign money per year. It's a fantastic business to be against GMOs. It's nearly the last slide. As long as the media, the politicians, the churches, our society listen to self-serving activists instead to scientists, and as long as present GMO regulation blocks the public sector, the technology will not substantially contribute to nutrition security. Millions of poor are taken hostage in an ideology-driven fight for political power and campaign money and in defense of unjustified regulation. Hundreds of millions of poor are denied the benefits of GMO biofortification because a handful of Western activists oppose the technology by principle. They have no argument. I have had many discussions. They just realized it's a fantastic means to collect campaign money. And as long as they will get campaign money for fighting against GMOs, they will not stop. Let me quickly acknowledge financial support. The major support came from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. If I would not have been full professor at this institute, Golden Rice would not have been possible. Rockefeller Foundation was supportive but contributed a relatively small part of the total amount. But we are grateful. It was very helpful. US Aid helped, the Gender Foundation, even the Gender Company. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation contributed the biggest part of the money. The Indian Department for Biotechnology. I have no list of all those co-workers who were involved in the project, but there were many. And the same is true in the lab of my partner, Peter Bayer. The advisory board was helping over 12 years by now without any financial reward. They just did it to support a humanitarian project, and there are 16 rice research institutes around the world who were very helpful in producing the right varieties. Peter Bayer was my partner from 1992 onwards, and he is up to date. Peter and I, we were a perfect team because we complemented each other perfectly. Peter was a scientist, a biochemist who understood the regulation of the pathway. I was the stubborn engineer who wanted to engineer this pathway into rice. I have very little knowledge about the pathway and about the biochemistry. The collaboration between Peter and me is a beautiful story, personal story. And Peter supported fully from the beginning the idea of the humanitarian project. Eden de Bock was the architect of public-private partnership. I must say a few words on this partnership. When we had our scientific breakthrough and tried to find financial support for product development and deregulation in the public sector, the response was totally negative. There was nobody in the public arena who had money or was willing to spend money to support product development. And that's understandable. Public sector has financial resources for basic science, for scientific novelty. Product development has nothing to do with scientific novelty. Product development is something companies do if they want to have a profit. So there was no support in the public domain. We could have given up, but we decided to go on nevertheless and tried to find support from the biotech industry. And the company who understood it was supportive was Syngenta, and Eden de Bock was a co-worker from Syngenta who was discussing with us, and Eden developed the structure of a sub-license agreement between us and Syngenta. We had to offer Syngenta, of course, something for sales support, and what we offered was the right for commercial exploitation of our invention. And Syngenta agreed in this deal because they felt they wanted to produce a commercial golden rice. After 2 years of investment, they realized they will never regain their investment, and they stopped the project. But we had a clause in our agreement that all progress in the commercial project would belong to the humanitarian project as well as vice versa. So we had lots of benefits from this 2-year company development of golden rice. Adrian was the man who taught us what it means to develop a product, And he is the driving force until now behind the product development. As I said, I have no list of co-workers, but I'm of course grateful to all those co-workers who invested part of their career in trying to make this project a reality. At the same time where this scientific breakthrough of engineering provitamin A into rice endosperm reached the public, this was at my farewell symposium from the ETH, because I had reached the age which is tolerated in European universities. I had to leave because I was 65. At the same farewell symposium, we reported about high iron rice. We had a similar project, which was not as successful as the golden rice project, and I could spend more time on describing the high iron rice project, but I will not do so. I hope you got a little bit a feeling for the difference of project for public good developed in the public domain compared to a project for a private financial return by big companies. And I'm relatively certain if we would have more results from public benefits from this technology, we would have less problems with the acceptance of this technology. And the reason why we are facing such an enormous campaign against golden rice is exactly this fact, that if the public would realize what good can be done with this technology, they would no longer follow the ideological position of Greenpeace and others. Thank you for your attention.
I just wanted to thank you very, very much for being here. During my bachelor's, actually 6 years ago, I first heard about you and your project, and it's just really, really nice to meet you in person. And I can't believe that back then, it was 9 years ago when you first discovered the golden rice, and now, so many years later, it's still not out there helping people. So I want to thank you for your effort and your persistence in that project. And I do have a question, but it seems insignificant, like thinking about all of the other issues that you have had with this project. But yeah, I would like to ask it anyway. And it's basically in the angiosperm, is that how you call like the cellular coating that the rice has? You also have vitamin A, right? But when you take that off and you have the plain rice, you don't have any vitamin A concentrations. So my question is, what is the ratio of golden rice vitamin A and the vitamin A that you find in the rice plant, and how much golden rice would one human being need to consume in order to have enough vitamin A for a day, for example?
Okay, you are speaking about provitamin A. Plants don't produce vitamin A. Our
provitamin, yes.
body converts provitamin A into vitamin A.
Sorry.
You refer to unpolished rice compared to polished rice. There is not even 0.02% of provitamin A in the food pill which you polish away. So this would be totally useless, and unpolished rice has lots of other negative characters. So it would not be advisable to eat too much of this unpolished rice, mainly because there's lots of phytate which intervenes with iron resorption. So the last part of your question I showed on a slide. If people would eat 40 grams of golden rice per day, this would protect them 100% from vitamin A deficiency. So 40 grams. You should know that children eat routinely 200 grams of rice and women eat 300 grams. So it would be a small proportion of the daily diet which would be required.
Thank you.
Does this answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Hi, I would just like to echo her words. I heard about your project in high school, and it's because of your inspirational project that I decided to go into science and technology, and I just received my PhD in that. So really, thank you for all the work that you've done on a personal note. And my question is regarding a little bit about, I just remember you mentioned a little bit about the daffodil. And I remember something about that there was the gene from the daffodil, and that's what you put in the rice. And then you mentioned a little bit about the iron rice as well. How easy is it, I mean, to kind of, did you just take the daffodil gene and put it in the rice? Did you take something from iron and put that in the same area? I'm just wondering of just a little bit of the difference between
Okay, the daffodil gene is the phytosynthetase, which was indeed taken from daffodil, because daffodil produces a lot of provitamin A. But the golden rice now contains the same gene from maize. So no longer daffodil, but maize. In iron, we have probed 3 genes. Iron is very complicated. There are at least 34 genes involved in iron metabolism in rice. We could increase the iron content by using 3 different genes for 3 different strategies. It would take too long to explain you the entire idea. To 4 to 5-fold of the natural iron content of those varieties which we have been using. Fortunately, this has made a lot of progress in Australia, and using genetic engineering, but high iron rice is now available, which reaches the target level of 14 micrograms per gram.
What color is the iron rice? Just wondering.
Sorry?
What color is the iron rice?
It has no color.
It has no color. It's
No,
white.
no.
Okay.
So it is no question that it will not take long to combine golden rice with high iron rice to have both iron and provitamin A.
You've gone through an obviously enormous struggle to get golden rice out in the world, but it appears that even with the vandalism that occurred, that within this year or in 2 years or in 3 years, there will be golden rice out there tested, and then presumably within 3, 4, 5, 6 years, it will become widespread, and it will be shown just by empirical evidence on a huge scale to be an enormous benefit to all the people who have a vitamin deficiency. And I'm wondering, I keep thinking of a parallel when vaccines were introduced a century ago, and there was enormous public concern about it, enormous resistance to it, but then once the first major vaccines got out there for the first diseases, people realized this is a very good, important advancement in science. So do you see light at the tunnel that not only with golden rice getting out there and working, but once it's demonstrated that it's enormously beneficial, that some of the big concerns about a product being produced and it costs the farmers too much, which obviously the way this is set up, it's free. Do you see perhaps a break to that resistance to buy the anti-GMO, particularly from the ones produced in the public sector?
That's of course what I am hoping for, and that's what the NGOs are fearing would happen. I'm relatively optimistic that, as you said, golden rice will prove how beneficial this technology can be used, and it is the first of many follow-up examples, like high iron, high zinc, high vitamin E, essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, and so on. I'm relatively optimistic that this will be the case. The problem is the costs for these projects if we maintain our regulatory system. So the highest priority I would put on is to convince the regulatory authorities that what they are doing doesn't make sense. It is very costly. It is immoral because it prevents that people get help who need help. There's actually a very interesting experience. I wrote an article in Nature last year complaining about the negative consequences of regulation, and I got lots of emails from people working in pharmacy telling me that we are in a similar situation. There would be lots of drugs available to poor people if regulation would not have set such a high level to register them. So there's a precedence in pharmacy. If regulation would not be so extreme for pharmaceutical new products, there would be lots of people not suffering from diseases they do because of high cost for regulation. So there's a parallel. So if regulation is attacked, it should be attacked not only for transgenic plants, but also for pharmaceutical products.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. Personally, I really admire your work and consider your work very noble. So my question to you is, what do you think, what is the main reason behind the opposition to your work from the people? Is it due to the wrong commercial use by the companies, or is it due to their beliefs? Because what I believe that GMO regulations are due to the wrong commercial use by the companies, right? So this is my question. Thank you.
Actually, the regulations we are suffering from is a product from ag biotech industry. They wanted this regulation. And this regulation fulfilled a fantastic purpose for a handful of companies. It killed hundreds of small competitors right away because there were lots of small, excellent venture companies producing very interesting science for products which all couldn't afford the money for registration. So the situation we have today, that we have 5 big companies distributing the market for GMOs amongst themselves, is a consequence of regulation. So they don't have an interest to change regulation. But your first part of the question was quite different. Why do we experience such a heavy opposition? And I said it already, it's a big business. If you are proposing to oppose GMOs, you get support from nearly every European government. You get support from organic farmer organizations. The United States Organic Farmer Organization has invested in 1 year $400 million campaign money for such NGOs. You can imagine what a profit organic farmer make with their material if they can afford to invest 400 million. This is all available at the internet. If you go and look who gets money from where, you can get the financial basis for all this opposition, and it's impressive. And as I said, much of this money is coming from governments, from European governments. So it's profitable. If you are an NGO and you want campaign money, you write a project for a campaign against GMO. So it's business, nothing else. They have not a single argument, and all the arguments they had against GMOs in general just don't fit for golden rice.
Well, it's about 10 years ago, I think, that we invited you to a Vienna conference when I was still in Vienna at the time being, and you were, giving the talk about golden rice, and everybody thought, well, this is just on the brink to get on the market, and it's 10 years ago, and we are still basically at the same point. This is a terrible situation. Now, in the meantime, I moved to Paris and realized, for example, also that there is not every scientist is actually convinced that GM technology is good. There's a lot of people scientists, they think, well, this is questionable. So I think, in fact, on this level, we still have to do a lot of work. But in fact, as last couple of years, during my work as president of the EPSO, the biggest plant science organization in Europe, I had a lot of talks with, in Brussels with politicians, and in fact I see that there's another word just coming up, which goes a step further, and this is just not plants that have been genetically engineered to contain a gene, but that actually refers to plants that people have touched at all in terms of some engineering. So, and if this is coming up, then I think, we are really going back to the Stone Age in many ways, at least in Europe, maybe not in the world. And I think, well, I just wanted to point that out, because I think, in fact, the fight is just on, and as you mentioned so clearly, I mean, there's a big multinational organization that works on fear and presents these cases in an incredibly effective media ways, which is completely immoral, but it's very effective.
Yeah. You are right. What we experience with GMOs is part of an anti-scientific movement in Europe, and it spreads out to the world. It's not restricted to Europe. It's spreading.
So, sorry.
Yep.
We have discussed a lot about the anti-NGO and anti-GMO movement, but I was wondering, I mean, most novel technologies actually are suffering from this problem where we face cultural, political, or economical opposition to it. I was wondering, I mean, for some technologies they can wait for education to catch up and then people to accept and see the good in these technologies and how they can affect positively their lives. However, in things like, for example, the golden rice, it seems that it's more urgent, it's need for humanity to understand the benefits. And I was wondering what are the strategies the golden rice is trying to implement, for example, after the uprooting in the Philippines, to get people to know the benefits and to educate into accepting or knowing the benefits of the technologies they are developing, that are being developed.
Yeah. So we are running a big program in the Philippines in the context of social marketing. So the Philippines get all information from different sources, all from Filipino sources, what is behind golden rice and for what it is good. And we have very good support from the Philippine government. And the fact that the Philippine Department of Agriculture is taking these vandals in front of the court is a very positive development.
Yes, getting the Pope to bless your rice was a piece of political brilliance, I think, in that context. But I just want to ask perhaps a slightly more positive question about the Embrapa developments, and wondering if you're able to pass comment on the way they seem to be having a smoother path for the commercial release of their beans, which they've engineered to be resistant to golden mosaic virus.
Yeah.
Is that a sign of hope for the future?
It looked very promising this virus-resistant bean project from Embrapa, but it is still not out. It had lots of positive responses from the government, from regulatory authorities, but it's not out yet. So I don't know what's holding it back, but Embrapa is indicating a positive development in Latin America. If we look around the world, where we see good reason for optimism is Brazil and Argentina and Peru. And so we hope that this stays on. We don't underestimate the power of Greenpeace and others who are playing like virtuos on the technology, how to influence media, and then if you have the media on your side, the other side has lost. So we will see. But it looks, in the moment, looks positive.
Thank you very much, Ingo, and I think we have some. Let's give him another hand. I think we have some gifts for you.
On behalf of the web organizing committee, we have gifts for both of you guys.
Okay.
Simple gifts, but
Thank you.
thank you very much.